This is part 2 of an introductory video series on centering clay and pulling up walls to form a basic cylinder on the potter's wheel. Please watch the first video for tips on centering your clay. Once your clay is centered, you are ready to open the clay. I do this by holding my left thumb like a tool, running it along the surface of my clay until it stops at the center, then gently pushing down in the clay to form a well. Sprinkle some water inside the well to reduce friction, and then continue pushing your thumb down into the clay. I like to use my index finger of my right hand paired with my left thumb to push into the clay for added stability and control. Making this well is an important step in ultimately creating an even thickness in your finished work. If your hole is off center, you will end up with one side of your cylinder thicker than the other, and as you pull up your wall, the thicker part will become taller. This is a common challenge for beginning students. You can check the thickness of the base of your well at this point by holding a finger against the side of the needle tool, pushing the tip of the needle through the base of your clay until it hits the metal wheel head, and then sliding your finger along the needle until it gently touches the clay. The distance between your finger and the tip of the needle is the thickness of your base. You can use a finger to recompress that hole made by the needle tool. The next step will be open up the clay from the base. I'm going to use the Spider-Man technique where I get 2 fingers on my right hand and pull toward myself, opening just at the base of the clay. I don't actually want to open the top of the clay. I'm just pushing the tips of my fingers down at the base and pulling toward myself. Here's a cross section of what that looks like. Now I'll recompress the rim so I get it nice and sturdy. And then the last step is going to be compressing the base. And I'll use my wooden rib with a 90-degree angle and hold the right edge against the right side of my pot. I don't want it to catch on the left side. This can be a little bit tricky, but I want to hold it against there and then also push down gently so I get a nice, smooth, flat base. Now I'll collar the clay back in by getting my hands wet and squeezing in slightly at the top. Now I have a nice cone shape to start pulling my wall. It's really important to have your clay super wet for this process, so I drip a bunch of water down the inside of my fingers, and then I'll start pushing at the base with my sponge and middle finger until I get that indentation in the clay, which I'll gradually pull up, and then I'll ease off the pressure as I pull up to the top of the wall. After every pull, I want to compress the rim by pushing down with 1 finger on my right hand and 2 fingers on my left hand. And now I'm ready for my next pull. So I'll start down at the base again. This time I'm not going to use a sponge. My inside finger is meeting my outside hand after I form that little indentation. And then I'm kind of lifting that little indentation up. And then once I get above the base of the clay, then I'm meeting my inside hand. Notice how my thumb is touching my other hand and helping stabilize. I've got my elbows in at my side, and then I gradually release the pressure as I come up to the top. I'll compress my rim again, and then I'll do another pull. I always need to make sure there's plenty of water there. I should never have any friction on the inside or the outside of the wall. I'll make that notch again, pushing down at the base. Here I'm holding my sponge and kind of getting underneath that notch, that indentation, and then really just trying to hold my elbows tight and steady, and then squeezing slightly from the inside, but most of the work is being done on the outside where I'm holding the sponge, pushing against the clay, and then just lifting that notch up as I go. You want to keep an eye on the inside of your pot in case water has kind of soaked down in there. And then you want to use a sponge to get that out at any time. If your pot is too narrow, you can use a tool with a sponge at the end of like a stick. Here it's a little close. My hand can barely fit down in there. And I just want to not have any water soaking down in the bottom. I still need to keep wetting the walls, and then this will be the last pull. I think this is my 4th pull here, and that's quite a few pulls. As you're working, water is soaking into the walls. As the clay absorbs water, it gets weaker, and as your fingers are gliding along it, you're inevitably causing friction, and that also can weaken the walls of the clay. So As you get better, you'll be able to pull up more clay with each pull, and so that part will get easier. The next step, I'm gonna just kind of even out the wall of this cylinder. It kind of is wider at the top now because I had my hand down in there soaking the water out of the base with the sponge. But I'm just gonna hold that wooden tool right up against the edge, and then from with my inside hand, just a couple fingers just at the base. I'm not using my whole hand. I'm just using my fingertips. I'm pushing out until I meet that wooden rib, and then I'm compressing the clay between my fingertips and then that wooden rib. And I'm holding the wooden rib kind of at a 90-degree angle to the midpoint of that cylinder. And see all that slip that I'm removing from there? That's clay that has absorbed a lot of water. So it's great to get that off of there because that means there's going to be less water in that clay, and it kind of strengthens the clay as you kind of squeeze the water and the slip out of there. You can also push the clay back down. That can really make it more sturdy, and I'll do that right here. So there I was pulling the wall up, but now I'm pushing my fingers back down and compressing the clay against the wooden rib. And anytime you're compressing the clay between your fingers and your rib, or even between both your fingers, you're compressing the clay and strengthening it, as opposed to when you're pulling the wall up, you're actually stretching the clay out. So for this demo, I'm just making a very basic cylinder and not doing any shaping or work beyond smoothing with a wooden rib. But there's all kinds of other finishing you can do. But that'll be the end of this tutorial. I'll just cut the work in half so you can see a cross section of the cylinder. I push my thumbs taut against the wire tool, pull it halfway through, and then carefully pull up and slice the work in half. Now we can see the wall thickness, how I did in terms of keeping the walls even. I want them ideally even thickness as the base. The base can be a little bit thicker if I'm planning to put a foot on there. That concludes this tutorial.